Okay, my name is Clarissa Morawski. I'm a Canadian with a Polish passport living in Barcelona, Spain. And I've been in the business of waste reduction public policy for about 25 years. And I'm here to share with you, I'm a stand-in for Mr. Poch, to tell you a little bit about what has evolved at the European Union from a legislative perspective in the last 8 months since we met last on May 22nd here in Prague. But before I start, very quickly on the Reloop platform, we don't only work on deposits, we work on pushing for mandatory minimum recycled content. And as you'll see, I think we've had some success in the last few months. We work very hard on introducing new forms of reusable packaging, not only for beverage containers, but consumer-based packaging, also very much supported with new legislation. We were a very key part of the new recycling calculation, which is now coded in EU law, which I'll talk about later. Deposit systems also. And finally, we are working to increase the collection and sorting of other packaging and other single-use, short-term life products. So these are the five things that we work on. But today I'm going to talk about deposits. Very quickly, this is our membership. What's unique about Reloop is we are an association that represents municipal interests, industry interests, or I like to say the businesses in the business of circular economy, the more progressive businesses, and the NGOs. But let's start with legislation. Two things happened in the last 2 years, and the first was amending existing laws at the EU level. And these are sort of 4 key points that I want you to understand that came out of the amendments of the Packaging Directive and the amendments to the Waste Framework Directive. First, a cap on landfilling waste by 10% by 2035, a 65% binding target for municipal household waste, recycling of household waste by 2035, new packaging targets, and I've highlighted plastics, which is 50% by 2025 and 55% by 2030. A new recycling calculation, which simply put, says there's a new point of measurement. We no longer count at the point that the material leaves the sorting facility. In the case of PET, baled, compressed PET. We now measure the point at which it enters the recycling process. So you have to assume that that's all the nasty stuff that we don't want, that we can't recycle, is removed from the weight of reported recycling tons. This means water, liquids, leftover Coke, glue, ink, labels, and even in some cases caps, if we're looking at the bottle rate without caps. This rate can be, in a good system with clean material, even deposit material, 25% yield loss. So when you're thinking about recycling rates and you're using a number that comes from the sorting facility, to be conservative for plastics, you can eliminate 25% right off the bat. And that's a very conservative estimate. We hear stories from Spain, UK, where it's closer to 40 and 50%. So 55% is a very, very big goal to hit because we have a new calculation method. And the final big thing coming out of the amendments is that producers will be required to pay more. They will have to take on a larger share of the cost of recycling. So that was passed and published in the spring. So that is official, absolutely official. Now, let's move on to the plastic strategy. Obviously, it came about because we have a massive litter problem. And in January, the European Commission released their plastic strategy. In it were a number of measures to be undertaken by the Commission, by member states, and even by industry, mostly in the form of pledging for recycled content. In May 2018, the Commission released a new directive, a draft law called the Single-Use Plastics Directive, and it was entirely aimed at fixing this problem of litter. That was its central goal. And I'm happy to say, in very, very quick timeline, like nothing we've seen before at the EU, On December 19th, just before Christmas, there was an agreement in the final trilogue negotiation between the Council and the Parliament. The text is now available. 2 days ago, the Council co-oper confirmed it, and it's now going to the Parliament for confirmation. So at this point, it's just procedural. Nothing's going to change. What I'm about to show you will become the law, probably published this spring. So take note. And I've just pulled out the most important parts. It's not a very long law. It probably measures about 13, 14 pages, of which 7 are the key, so it's well worth a read. So the first part of the law is bans, or what they call restrictions. These are the materials that will be restricted for sale in the European Union as of 2021, which is 2 years after publishing. So if it's published in the spring, in 2 years, you will not be able to sell these products in the European Union. I think one of the more notable ones is the last one, expanded polystyrene, or EPS, packaging, cups, take-away food containers, etc. This is going to be restricted for sale in Europe. It is already restricted for sale in San Francisco and soon in New York, and I suspect that this trend will happen all over the world. Next, product requirements. There's 2 big ones. One is really big. Well, they're both really big. The first one basically says that single-use plastic containers and multi-material containers like Tetra Pak will have to have the lid connected to the bottle. They use the term tethering, which basically means if you're at the beach and you remove the lid, it's not going to end up in the ocean. This will be a very expensive undertaking by the beverage industry. Amazingly enough, it ended up in the law, and they have 5 years to meet that obligation. It's not 2 years. They've given them a little bit more time because, indeed, it's a massive investment for the beverage industry. The second thing that's also a new design requirement is 25% minimum content in plastic bottles on average for member states. And that is for PET by 2025, and by 2030, all beverage containers, including high-density polyethylene and even polystyrene beverage containers, if any still exist. So this is also a very prescriptive requirement for design. Next. This has to do with extended producer responsibility, and suffice to say, if you read the blue, it now says producers will pay for collection, transport, treatment, and the costs of litter cleanup and awareness raising. So this is not only a greater share of the cost, but now they're adding another cost element in, which is litter collection. Chris from Eunomia knows a lot about the cost of litter collection, but I can tell you it is by far the most costly part of any waste management system, is picking up the litter. So that will have a massive impact on all producers whose products end up in the litter stream. Article 9 sets out a tiered target. This is the actual text, and I think what's interesting is that the Article 9 is to collect separately for recycling. So it does not include collecting separately for incineration. It's only for recycling, and it sets by 2025 77%, and by 2029 90% for beverage containers, and it's all single-use beverage containers up to 3 liters. So it's the vast majority of them. And the other piece is they add that these targets can be achieved whichever way you like. You can do it via a deposit system, or if you want, you can do it through your existing EPR green dot system, through sort of intensification, more public awareness, or whatever, but you have to meet these 2 sets of targets. So that is the legislation as it is today, and I believe it will become formally published sometime in the spring. So please feel free. You should be able to get it online. If you can't get it, send me an email and I'll send you a copy. So it is, as Pasquale said, a really ambitious law, and I think that the world is looking to Europe now and its leadership and to see how well they're able to implement this law. I just want to say one other thing I haven't put up on the slide is that there is a focus on data in this law, and one of the things around this target in particular is not only the re-looking at recycling and making sure that we don't include things like ink and glues and the weight of liquids, but in our numerator, in how much we're claiming to be recycling, but also there's going to be some new work done on how we determine the denominator. What is placed on the market? As many of you know, this is often a soft number. We don't really know necessarily. We know what they tell us, the producers, but we don't know how much free riding is in the system, how much material is not actually included in the denominator. What we are finding is that there is a lot of free riding that we don't know about, and the European Commission will be undertaking an official methodology to put into law through an implementing act over the next, I believe it's 18 months. So this too is going to be fixed. We are going to get a much better understanding of what actually is placed on the market in each member state. So now I'm going to switch, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the evolution of deposits. And I can tell you, I've been in this industry for 25 years. I found out about deposits in 1998 and been keenly involved in looking at it and reporting it. And I have seen more change from a public policy perspective in the last 6 months than I've seen in my 25-year career. So let's take a look at what's going on around the world. So we can say that there's been a lot of development all through the world. We can say that the most recent implementation was in Queensland, Australia, just recently in November, and before that on December 1st of last year, it was New South Wales, and now I just found out that Victoria is likely going to legislate deposits, which means that it will be the continent of Australia, will be the first continent to have deposit return across from ocean to ocean. But others have happened as well. So Scotland, we know that they will have a program in place likely by 2020. Malta is designing a system now, probably will be in place, ready to go by end of 2019. Portugal, a brand new law was just recently published, and it looks at introducing an incentive system that shifts into a deposit system by 2022. Turkey, 80 million people, has just published their law, and there will be a deposit as of 2021. I should say Portugal's about 10 million people, Scotland's about 5 million, Malta's tiny, and then Romania about 20 million. Also in their emergency ordinance, we're looking at an implementation by roughly March of 2022. So these are big countries that are moving to deposits, and I'm not finished. Slovakia is in the process of preparing legislation. They've done an economic analysis, they're writing the legislation, and if all goes well, it will be implemented by 2022. The English government is seriously considering deposits. They're in consultation now. They're looking at different models. And even in France, they are looking at how to implement a deposit system, even though it's quite controversial, as it always is. But even they are also looking at it. So we're looking at some very big players in Europe that are looking at making the shift. And they're making the shift because they all knew that they would have to meet a 90% real recycling target by 2029. So this calls into the question, okay, can a 90% separate collection for recycling target be achieved without DRS? So let's explore this, because this is ultimately the question on everyone's mind. We have a new context. We have a new calculation method. We no longer count what comes out of the sorting facility. We count what goes into the recycling machine, basically. We have new rules for EPR. We're going to be measuring all of the material placed on the market, even the material put in the business sector that maybe never touches a household. So we're going to have a better denominator. And brand owners have to meet recycled content obligations. Littering needs to be addressed in whatever plan is being put forward. So this is new set of context parameters. Let's look at Manitoba. Here is a case study. Little under 2 million people in Canada. They went with a non-deposit model to achieve 75%. They collect 2 cents on every unit. The industry pools the money. We're talking about Coke and Pepsi. They bring the money together. They put out a public awareness campaign. They buy bins. They give away bins for free. They collect for over 99% of all householders in the country, in the province, and it's been running for about 8 years. So how are we doing? If we're going to look at any case study, this is the one we need to look at. Okay, so they've definitely increased their collection. They hit 70% last year, and now they're at 68%, and those numbers are refuted. They're being told that they're bad numbers, they're not being transparent, and there's calling into question in a massive way how credible the data is. So I think that this is a good case study to look at, and if we can hit 68% as the top, and even kind of plateau at 68%, we need to consider this case study. Here's another great slide from Inkpen, which is sort of the brand owner association out of UK, and they said many years ago, based on our analysis, best case scenario is 69%. Why? Because you have to target all the householders that are consuming beverages. You have to make sure that most of them participate. They have to do it properly and not put in contamination. So even if you have 95 and 90% participation, you get really good results, you still end up with 69%. And that is consistent with Manitoba. So please look at this because this is a very important slide. We looked at the United States. We noticed the green curve is access to recycling. What percentage of the population can recycle was going up in America. But the recycling rates were going down. How could it be? We're doing intensification and the results are going down. And without getting into details, because I don't have time, please look at this link on my own company website. This gets into an analysis of why. Why is it that they are not able to achieve high recycling rates, even though everybody can recycle? And it basically gets into the fact that not everybody is going to participate unless you make it super easy. And I do recommend, if you're interested in the subject, that you read this article. A lot of analysis was done, and the case was basically proven that 69 is best case scenario. And finally, I'm going to end with a slide on lessons learned. First of all, data is difficult to get and can be highly suspect. And this is where we need to focus in the next 2 years. And we are going to focus. And we're going to get the real numbers so that we know what the real situation is. Quality for bottle-to-bottle applications is poor from commingled recycling. There's absolutely no denying it. We're going to have more packaging in the mix now with ramped-up targets for plastics. So when producers need 25% content, and there's going to be a lot of competition for PET in the market because there's already a lot of demand for rPET already, and now all the brand owners are going to have to get more rPET, quality is key. Obviously, green dot intensification systems don't address litter, and litter needs to be part of the overall plan. If you're not paying for your garbage and recycling is free, don't expect you're going to get a lot of increased participation. We call it user pay. User pay has to be a part of the system if you want to have a non-deposit system. You have to charge people for garbage. And it's highly political, municipalities don't like doing it, but you will not get success unless you're charging people for garbage. You have to make garbage harder than recycling or more expensive than recycling. And finally, we need to also consider dry recyclable mixed waste sorting. We have to go there. We have to look at getting organics out and actually using technology to dig deep into the garbage and pull out not beverage containers necessarily only, but all valuable plastics. So these are some considerations as we go forward. And with that, I'm going to end. Thank you.